Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. It's time to stop. Hey, what's uptown? Nobody look what's going down.
My name is John Pilecki. I'm with the St. John's Democratic Party and the Environmental Caucus of St. Johns County. This is the third of our intergenerational sessions. We've made it part of our Environmental Challenge weekend. This is the fourth year of it. The first environmental challenge, or the first challenge, intergenerational challenge, was last October. It was sort of just a general, almost like a meet and greet at the main library, where people of different ages talked about their political beliefs and how they came about them. That was good. We had a second one at the Lincoln Historical Museum and Cultural Center, where we talked about racial justice and equality, and that was excellent. It was really a good evening. I think everybody got something out of that. So we decided to do a third one to wrap around our environmental challenge, and we have a panel of what I call environmental professionals. Okay, Jen Stanko of the Sierra Club Northeast Florida branch, Jane West, an environmental lawyer, Lisa Blizzard of the Sea Shepherd Society, Jen Lomberg, okay, the Matanzas Riverkeeper, and Bill Hamilton, who a local business owner and an important part of the Environmental Youth Council. Belatedly, I want to thank Uncle Eddie and Robin for their fine musical performance. They have to leave for another. Anyway, now comes the main event. We're going to start the intergenerational session 3.0, and we'll begin with an environmental legislative update with Jane West and Layla Slate, okay, from St. Augustine High School. I want to say a special thanks to Layla, because one of the other students here are from the Nice High School Environmental Club. One of the students had to back out because of a work commitment. And I had met Layla at the march a couple of weeks ago in St. Augustine, and she came up to me and said, "Hey, I'd really like to get involved in this." And I said, "Well, we have 5 students now, but if one can't do it, would you be interested in filling in?" She said, "Yeah." Well, 2 days before, just last week, somebody did have to drop out, and I called up Layla, and she said, "Sure, I'll do it." So it was really, really thanked Layla particularly. So anyway, Jane, would you like to start off with your presentation?
Sure. Okay, so it's been another interesting legislative session. I'm going to quickly kind of recap just what has happened in the 2018 legislative session here in Florida. I had this same sort of program last year, if any of you were here, and I think it was helpful for just people to know what's going on over in Tallahassee. So I am not addressing anything that is happening on the federal level, because quite frankly, that would take too long and it's thoroughly depressing. So we're just going to keep it kind of local. First and foremost, I kind of wanted to get the money issues out of the way, because there was actually, thankfully this year, the Florida legislature finally listened to the voters' intent on Amendment 1 that was passed a couple years ago, if you may recall, where we really wanted funding for Florida Forever to come back. And this is the percentage of the dock stamps that goes towards land conservation measures. And you may recall a couple years ago, the voters of the state of Florida overwhelmingly approved of this amendment. And then the legislature just went sideways on the allocation of those funds and spent them in a way that was definitely not the voters' intent. So finally, in this legislative session, we started to see some funding come down the pike. The reason I highlighted the ones in red, though, and I think this is kind of important. Can everyone see this? Am I blocking you? A good chunk of these funds went to South Florida for Everglades restoration, which admittedly is really important. But I do think we need to have a very honest conversation in the state of Florida about the expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars to this right now we're in a couple of billion-dollar phases in terms of SERP and Everglades restoration. And we have to balance that with the practical reality of sea level rise and the fact that the Everglades are going to be facing saltwater intrusion. So, you know, is this a prudent allocation of our taxpayer revenue? And I know I'm not going to be popular for putting that out there, but I think we just need to get smart about it, because this sort of funding is coming up head-to-head with the appropriation for other funding measures to help natural resources in the state of Florida. For example, the St. Johns River protection, our springs protection, beach nourishment projects, whether or not you consider that beneficial for the environment is, you know, questionable. But these measures don't get the sort of funding that, quite frankly, they really do need, because those funds are being allocated towards Everglades restoration. Preemptions were a very hot topic last year, and again, local home rule is under attack. And this is really unfortunate, and there were a lot of issues that didn't pertain to the environment, where basically there were multiple attempts on the legislature's part to curtail the ability for local municipalities to exercise control over things that affect our daily quality of life. So things like tree trimming, public parks, puppy mills, municipal parking garages, fertilizers, sanctuary cities, plastic bags, vacation rentals, red light cameras, community redevelopment agencies, local elections. All of these substantive topics, the legislature tried to take control away from our local government and put it exclusively within the hands of the state. Some of those measures passed and others did not, and I'll touch on the ones that relate to the environment. Okay, so I'm starting off first and foremost with beach access. This was House Bill 631, and it preempts local governments from adopting ordinances to allow continued public entry to privately owned beaches. So if local governments do want to adopt an ordinance like that, that would allow that public access, they would first have to get approval from a judge, which means they have to sue the landowner, which, if you work with local municipalities, is something they don't want to do. So this is not a great bill by any stretch. However, I don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of impacts from it here in St. John's, or really even in Duval, because it doesn't pertain to current beach management, nourishment, and erosion control programs, and almost all of our beaches are subject to one of those programs. But I thought it might be helpful to have a little diagram, and this is the area of sand that we're talking about, whether or not public access would be allowed there. Coral Reef Bill HB 53 creates a Southeast Florida Coral Reef Ecosystem Conservation Area. This is a measure, if you may recall, was attempted last year, but it failed. It's basically creating a box of submerged land that extends all the way from the St. Lucie Inlet down to Biscayne National Park. And this goes into effect pretty quickly, July 1st, 2018. And the reason why it's important, it doesn't just establish a box, it makes that whole area able to get federal funding for a lot of the coral bleaching and other coral diseases that are basically wreaking havoc on those reefs down there. Do we have any divers? Have any of you seen the reefs in South Florida? Yeah, they're amazing, but if you've seen them now compared to just like 10 years ago, there's a stunning difference. There's the non-native species, Senate Bill 168, basically directs FWC to start getting serious about a lot of invasive species, including lionfish. Water management surplus lands basically allows the district to get rid of surplus land to adjacent property owners. Recycling requires local governments to address the contamination of recyclable material in residential recycling contracts, and residential recycling collectors or processing facilities don't necessarily have to collect contaminated material any longer. Replacing docks, this was particularly germane to us here in St. Johns County after our 2 hurricanes. So no ERP, which is an environmental resource permit, which is usually required, will be required for the replacement or repair of existing docks that are located within 5 feet of and no larger than the original dock. And as long as they don't have any additional impact on aquatic resources, you don't need to go through that permitting process again. So that's actually pretty beneficial to a lot of people here in St. Johns County. Wastewater systems. I personally thought this was a totally bogus bill, but that's just my opinion. It essentially creates a Blue Star collection system assessment. It's one of these voluntary standards where if the utility provider can show that they're meeting these certain threshold requirements, they get a Blue Star. And if they get a Blue Star, DEP can reduce their penalties for overflow if the utility is in the program. And in addition, this measure also creates a presumption of compliance with state water quality standards if that utility shows a history of compliance with disinfection requirements. So I don't think any of that is good, but that's just me. The state assumption of Section 404 dredge and fill permitting authority. When I first saw this come through, I'm like, oh, that's a joke. That's not happening. Oh no, that happened. And Layla is going to go into depth on this particular measure that was pretty scary. Implementation of this should be really interesting. Growth management, what has passed? HB 1151 pertaining to DRIs. Whatever we had left of DRI regulations, which are development of regional impact, so we're talking big developments. Whatever was left has been gutted, basically. HB 405, linear facilities, so this basically vests the PSC, the Public Service Commission, not local government, this is one of the preemption things, to have sole authority over siting electrical transmission lines and undergrounding. Continuing with what did not pass, what did not pass. HB 1149, sewage dumping into our aquifer system. Layla, were you going to address that one at all? I forget our conversation on that. Yeah, she's got that one. This is just, what a boondoggle that we're even talking about this. Private property rights. This did not pass. Basically, this would have required local governments to adopt a private property rights element into all of our comprehensive plans. We already have the Burt-Harris Act. We don't need this. So I was really thrilled to see that that did not pass. The Omnibus Growth Management Bill, Gennaro, who works with me, did some last-minute lobbying on this bill too. Thankfully, it did not pass. This was House Bill 883. It would have done a lot of things. It was a huge bill. But the problem that I had with it, it was going to create loopholes for developers that were seeking to develop land that was designated rural in counties that use urban growth boundaries. So basically, if you had a university property anywhere within the county, like we're talking the IFAS extension out in Hastings, the 3-mile perimeter around that, even though it's totally rural, would be considered urban. Tree trimming and removal. I personally lobbied pretty hard on this. It basically would have preempted all local government from regulating tree trimming or removal. So St. Johns County, our cities, would no longer be able to have anything like a tree ordinance, which we really are trying to get adopted right now because we're seeing a lot of land clearing going along that's destroying our resources. Transportation. Suncoast Parkway basically lost all its funding for that. And we had a lot of bad stuff, like safety for bicyclists failed, red light camera ban, a lot of stuff on transportation. I'm trying to go a little quickly because I know there's a lot of speakers. The ban fracking bill failed. This is the second time. However, have hope because it definitely had a lot more traction this year, and there's some of you that can speak a lot more eloquently on this bill than I can. And it died very late in the process. It died in appropriations. So just need to keep on that. And then the one that's near and dear to my heart, the plastic bag ban. This was such a benign bill. It authorized coastal communities, so not everywhere in Florida, to establish a pilot program to regulate or ban disposable plastic bags. Totally voluntary, nothing mandatory, and it failed. Don't get me started. However, I will say this, the city of St. Augustine Beach is implementing for the month of April a voluntary plastic bag ban, so they're encouraging you to use reusables. And I have a whole stack of flyers with me if you want more information on that. And that's it. Thank you. And now Layla is going to supplement my presentation.
So Jane mentioned Senate Bill 1402, and I was
put that mic over the post.
There we go. Is that better? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay, there we go. So the Florida legislature passed this bill permitting the Florida Department of Environmental Protection the power to control the control federal jurisdiction of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Which regulates the discharge of dredged or fill material into the waters of the United States, including wetlands. And this is concerning that it would transition over to them, mainly because the FDP has had highly politicized permitting policies, at least in recent years, and have allowed permits to be issued to dredge and fill wetlands for development with less scrutiny than in the past. And I thought it would be important to mention that the position of the Florida Conservation Coalition on this bill states that the coalition is opposed to these bills as a state 404 program rather than federal, because it's likely to provide less protection for Florida's wetlands than the current federal program does. And Floridians will not know whether or not a state 404 program will provide sufficient environmental protection until well after these bills have become law. And basically this is because we wouldn't know the extent of the protections that the bill would provide, because outlined priorities and procedures of the bill are agreed upon by the state and the EPA, that the state and the EPA agree upon won't be finalized until afterwards. And at that point, the legislature no longer has any role in the delegation process. And furthermore, the rulemaking and framework of the bill would be negotiated without opportunities for public comment or legal challenge. So basically, this leaves no room for security or proof of protection. And I thought it would be important to note that the delegation process for this bill eliminates the protections that the National Environmental Policy Act provides. And basically, currently, the Policy Act requires that the federal government prepare a comprehensive analysis or environmental assessment for each permit that it reviews. And during this process, if the environmental assessment concludes that granting a permit will result in significantly negative impacts, a weighing of the impacts and alternatives is then conducted. So clearly the process is extremely important, as it helps negotiate project configurations and wetland protections. But under this bill, which gives Florida 404 permitting authority, the process of proper review no longer takes place, with the weighing of the need versus the loss of environmental protections, as it's not necessary under Florida law. And so the next thing that I was going to go into further was House Bill 1149, which basically legislators at the time approved a measure to allow utilities to pump treated sewage water into the aquifer from which the water came before it was polluted. And the idea is to supplement declining aquifer levels so they can keep pumping water out of it. So luckily, Rick Scott just recently vetoed this bill. He claims that he does not want to damage the trust that Floridians have in our water quality, and he's not convinced that this legislation would not damage the protection of our aquifers. Yeah, so. But, right, I don't know if I have room to flip this over. Yeah. I can just take this out, okay. On a more positive note, Senate Bill 370 passed, which this bill dedicates $100 million annually from the Land Acquisition Trust Fund to the Florida Forever Trust Fund. I don't know how far you went into that. Did you discuss it?
I just gave them all the numbers.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, it's, I'm sure you're all aware that it's the premier land conservation program, so it provides a trust for the Florida Forever provides a trust for the citizens of Florida, and it's used for parks, trails, wildlife management areas, and flood control. And initially, it was a much smaller amount. The amount that was guaranteed, $100 million, was much smaller than what was sought out, which was around $3 million, which is positive in terms of the past couple years is what the program has received, although it's the larger amount that was sought out was more reasonable, as acquiring the remaining land that Florida Forever intends to do would potentially cost up to $500 million. So hopefully that can be built upon. And then I can go into, there was House Bill 339. This bill didn't pass, but it was intended to restore the Indian River Lagoon. Dirty water filled with sediment and toxins in the Indian River Lagoon spews out from the Fort Pierce Inlet into the Atlantic shoreline in Fort Pierce currently. And this happens because excess water from Lake Okeechobee is released through St. Lucie locks and empties into the Indian River Lagoon. This causes toxic conditions and discoloration, which then flows into the inlets into the Atlantic Ocean. Sadly, this bill didn't pass. It would have dedicated 7.6% of the $50 million annually from the Land Acquisition Trust Fund to the Indian River Lagoon, which is a comprehensive conservation and management plan. And then another bill that didn't pass but was intended for positive impact was Senate Bill 174. This bill would have secured beach nourishment money and changed how the state selects projects for funding through a system of ranking and prioritizing projects for funding, but this bill didn't pass either. So.
Not a lot of good news.
No, not really, yeah. I'm sorry to have to start off with that.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. My understanding regarding NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. Now, from what you said, are you saying that in order, well, it used to be in order to get federal funding for projects, it had to go through the NEPA requirements of EA or environmental, whatever, NEA, whatever, environmental assessment or impact statement?
Yeah.
So are you saying under the proposed laws now that they can disregard NEPA and still get federal funding?
No. So two totally different statutes. 404 is under the Clean Water Act. And you would still, for a federal project, need to go through all the NEPA requirements. So that has not been eviscerated yet. But yeah, so that criteria, that statute still very much remains on the books. And I think it is important to know that this is a delegation of the federal authority to the state. Florida is not totally unique in this regard. Other states also have taken over basically the implementation of what is required under federal law. So it's not totally unusual. It's just that Florida DEP under this current administration doesn't exactly have a great track record.
Next topic is non-legislative environmental activism. Janice Danko and Ashley Weinstein. And this is an important one because you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a politician, you don't have to be a lawyer or anything else. All you need is some shoe leather and some determination to make a change.
Thank you, John. I'm going to open up the topic and then turn it over to Ashley, and then I'll add a few more points after she's made her part of the presentation. We're glad to follow after the legislative presentation because, you know, we've had some wins, but we had a lot of losses. And plastic bag ban, fracking ban, we've been working on that for years. So is there anything else we can do that could effect change without having to pass laws or complementary to trying to pass a law? And yes, there is. there's a lot of stuff that we'll talk about that you already know about, but lately writers have been talking about how effective these techniques are in effecting change. We want to talk to you about social media, and I'll talk to you about some related ancillary ideas kind of around the social media. So with this, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
I'm sorry, I'm just organizing my notes. Okay. Cool. Okay, so a lot of the times when we're talking about the environment, especially when we're talking about legislation, it's kind of really hard to digest or grasp because a lot of us aren't lawyers or politicians. We're just regular people who genuinely care about the environment, at least speaking for myself. So to start off with just a few facts, just so you guys can kind of understand how big environmental issues are and why we're doing this today, I've just compiled a few facts before I get into my actual presentation. More than 3 million children die annually from environmental factors under the age of 5. 1 in 6 people are exposed to fatal air pollution every day. Although the US makes up 5% of the population, we use 25% of the world's resources, including coal, oil, and natural gas. So those are just a few things that are really kind of surprising. Maybe some of you knew, maybe some of you didn't. So today in my environmental activism, I'm going to be mainly focusing on social media via Twitter and petitions. A lot of people could think that the internet's a bad thing or it's evil or a lot of bad comes out of it, which is sometimes true, but when it comes to the environment, a lot of positive things have come from the internet. The first thing I wanted to talk about is an EPA blog that I found that was created in 1994. It works with community-based organizations. Organisms do work there though. They're commonly known as CBOs. So when I say CBO, I'm just talking about a community-based organization. And they can make big changes with small funds, which is something that you're usually like, what, small funds? Basically what they do is, the EPA has something called an Environmental Justice Small Grant Program. And they've teamed up with over 1,400 CBOs to basically give small funds to small places to make big changes. And eventually, over time, if we can make enough small changes, it'll make a big change overall. And that's my belief, start small and go big. One example I wanted to give you is the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, which none of us probably heard of because it's very tiny. In 2015, they were given a grant to protect and conserve water. Since then, they have recycled over to protect and conserve water and electronics. I wanted to make that clear. So, recycle electronics. So they've recycled over 12,000 electronics and 1,800 tires, and they've conserved countless gallons of water. This is something that may be shocking because the town of Choctaw probably has less than 20,000 people, and they've already made these huge changes just by getting a small grant from the small grant justice system, the Environmental Justice Small Grant Program. Okay, so that's an example of how creating your own blog post could make a big change. Anybody could make a blog. You don't have to be involved with the EPA or the small grant program. Any single person could go online and create a blog and say, hey, I'm from a small town, and kind of advocate for yourself to get involved with this program. Again, start small and go big. Another way that you could advocate is Twitter. Twitter creates visibility, and you could have your views be individual. You know, you don't have to believe certain things. You could believe whatever you want, and you could kind of promote that there. And some of the most successful, I don't know if you guys have heard of hashtag campaigns. Basically, it's just do like a little hashtag and you could say whatever you want. So you guys have probably heard of the Ice Bucket Challenge, Black Lives Matter movement. All of these campaigns started on a hashtag basis via Twitter. One that I wanted to talk about that they do in the UK is called hashtag Earth Hour. And this has inspired people to appreciate nature. Take an hour away from your phone and go outside and appreciate the world. And something as small as that, you may be saying, how are you helping the environment? That 1 hour that you're not on your phone, you're not using electricity. Right there, you're already doing something. So anybody could do a hashtag campaign, and that's something that I've always really been inspired by and something I've always wanted to do. So hopefully by the next environmental panel, I'll have my own hashtag to promote. Sometimes though, when it comes to environmental platforms, bigger is sometimes better. Sometimes Twitter might be too small a platform. Maybe you want to reach more people. So you could do that with a blog, or you could create a website. And what's really cool about a website is that's something that's global. So you could have people from all around the world join it, just as you can on Twitter. But this is better for when you're looking for donations and things like that, because it's just a little bit of a bigger platform and people might trust it more. One of the most interesting websites that I found, and I really recommend you guys actually check it out, it's called the Texas Campaign for Environment. The Texas Campaign for Environment, if you guys want to look that up. Basically, it fights pollution through sustained grassroots, and this is all basically done by people knocking door to door. People my age, people 50 years older than me, anyone could join. You could just sign up. You don't have to donate, but you can. I noticed they have a donation box, and they also have a link where you could just sign up and be a part of something. And that's the great thing about using social media, is that they're not asking you all the time to donate or to open your wallets. A lot of the time, it's just getting involved and showing you care and kind of tagging along with people who have the same beliefs as you. So they have knocked on 500,000 doors since 1991, and they've had tens of thousands of members. And that's a lot of people, especially just considering this is knocking door to door. They're not doing anything that's out of reach. They're doing things that you and I could do. And so they've worked also with recycling, just people's basic rights to know and to be aware of the toxic sites that might be around them, and everything like that. So basically, just in conclusion of my little part, anyone could have Twitter, anyone could have a blog, anybody could make a website. These are just a few major examples that I found, but absolutely anybody could do this and be a part of something and start their own campaign. It doesn't need legislation.
My part of the topic will complement what Ashley has said. I want to talk a little bit about NGOs, another acronym, non-governmental organizations targeting corporations. And a non-governmental organization could be any organization. I belong to Sierra Club, that's an NGO. Maybe the Democratic Environmental Caucus could be considered an NGO. Greenpeace, Organic Consumers Association, is definitely an NGO. These are some environmental examples. But these organizations can do campaigns. And I have an example. I had several examples, but for the sake of brevity, I'll just share one, where they target the NGO or a coalition of NGOs targets one corporation. Kimberly-Clark. In this example, Greenpeace campaigned against Kimberly-Clark, which makes Kleenex, Scott tissues, and Huggies, and accused the company of destroying old growth forests for throwaway products. Basically, Kimberly-Clark knew they had a problem in this arena, but they had just not made the decision to address it until Greenpeace ramped up their campaign. And of course, their campaign is not just toward the corporation, but it's public. And the public can pick up on those messages and communicate to the corporation. When they did that, Kimberly Clark, as they said, they were this close to making the decision. Well, they went the rest of the way and decided to change the way they sourced the paper for their throwaway projects. And so they increased the use of recycled and Forest Stewardship Council certified fiber from 54% to 83%. And so that really made a big difference, because why knock down old growth trees for toilet paper? Come on. So, but it was quite it was an accomplishment. And here's the other good news about it. Once Kimberly Clark agreed to commit to sourcing their paper products from better sources, Procter & Gamble followed suit. So, because once you've demonstrated to the world that one corporation can make this change, how can Procter & Gamble say they can't do it? So anyway, that set those dynamics in motion. It was just one change in one corporation, but it had a ripple effect. And that was because of a certain organizational campaign. And many times we'll say Greenpeace did this, and it may be Greenpeace with a coalition of other organizations, because we have to be bigger. And we are coalescing, and I know you guys are doing it at the local level. My second point is vote with your dollars. Have you ever noticed, and you probably do this, in grocery stores, people are reading the labels. And they're looking for something that they care about, low sugar or GMOs or organic or no MSG. So, you know, for various reasons they're reading the labels. And so this is called voting with your dollar, where you are gravitating toward the products that you want. This is not a boycott. You know, boycott is almost passé, but you know, it's still a tool in the arsenal. But it's where people are, for positive reasons, are going toward the products that they want. And corporations are monitoring this trend with sales analysis, consumer panels, and they do check social media to see what people are saying about their products. And they just hate it when they read about themselves on Facebook in a negative context. And I've had a personal experience where I was exasperated, and I mentioned a situation I had with Sears. They sent me an email and said, let's talk. And I was told that that is an effective technique, and sure enough it was. Here's an example. Sales of fresh grass-fed beef soared from 17 million in 2012 to 272 million just 4 years later. This is despite the fact that it costs more to buy grass-fed beef. A part of this mix is the fact that you know, some people feel that grass-fed beef is better for them, but it's also better for the animal. And animal welfare is becoming more important to consumers. And food producers are recognizing this. So we do have a lot of strength in our fingertips, and we can sign petitions. They don't necessarily go off into a black hole, because if there's an NGO out there that's orchestrating things, you're adding your voice to what they're saying at their level, but you're talking from the grassroots, and that is powerful. In summary, these tactics that I've shared are one corporation focused on one change, as opposed to legislative that goes across the board. And you can see why legislative is more difficult. And if you can strategically select your target, such that if you can get, for example, if you can get Publix to quit using plastic bags, maybe Winn-Dixie will, or Home Depot. It's just, I know that plastic bags, with being on the coast, is a big issue because plastic bags go into the ocean. Major corporations use surveys, sales analyses, and they review social media. And so you're talking directly to them when you give that feedback. And sometimes you will help them make the change they know they need to make. And in talking to JEA, Sierra Club has, this is our local utility, we've told them about changes that we wanted to see. And behind the scenes, they said, we wanted to make these changes too, and you're giving us the public pressure to do it. My last point is, be sure that you're aware of the organizations that represent your opinions and join them. And you may not feel you have time, but you don't have to get actively involved. You probably will be getting emails and action alerts from them. And please, please take advantage of the opportunity to communicate through those action alerts and do additional actions as well. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Janet?
Oh, sure.
The JEA, are they going to still sell? That if the truck's going to come for sale, they want to sell the utility and make it private?
What was your question around that?
Did you talk to them about the fact that they want to become, sell it to a private organization?
The talks that we had with them didn't have anything to do with that, no. No, it had more to do with power production. Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole separate issue. And we haven't taken a position on that yet because there's just no real facts about whether public or private ownership of a utility leads to more environmental stewardship or not. So we'll be watching though, and we're still evaluating. Any other questions?
I think public power a priori is better environmental protection because you've got a government entity that's involved in that's their own utility. I would disagree. I think it's a no-brainer. We should support the JPA requirement.
I'm sorry, did you mention an organization?
I'm sorry. I said that I think a priori a investor-owned utility, an IOU, is not going to be as good as public power. Public power is going to be either a rural electric co-op or a government entity that are going to protect the environment.
Well, like I said, we haven't taken a position, but we will be looking to evaluate that.
Okay, y'all need to support investor-owned utilities.
Yes.
What was the tipping point with Kimberly-Clark as far as getting them to make that change in the old air forests? Is there a trend as far as, just something recognizable as far as getting, a large corporation to make, what may not be an economical change for them as far as their behavior? I'm just trying to make some kind of connection between that change and what we'd like to see with some of the plastic bag grocery stores and hardware stores. What was the tipping point?
I don't specifically know the tipping point, but I do suspect that there has been a lot of media publicity about the implications for old growth forests and about alternatives to cutting down old growth trees. And there's also a lot of recycled paper available. So I think, it could be a number of things that came together on that. Any other questions?
Thank you. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Janet and Ashley. What I took away from that was back-to-back presentations is that ordinary people, are getting more done about the environment than the people in Tallahassee and Washington. So, that's a good segue into our next topic. That's ocean waste with a focus on plastics. and Elisa Blizzard and Parker Sanford actually did put their leathers to the streets and did some actual work in this area. So take it on.
Is everyone here pretty much familiar with Sea Shepherd? No, okay. We're an ocean conservation organization. We were established in 1977, and we do have a connection to Greenpeace. Our founder, Paul Watson, kind of broke off from Greenpeace and started his own thing. So basically we have 12 vessels that are in the ocean trying to promote protection of marine mammals. And from there, I'll go to not standing in front of that. Okay, so we've been tasked to present how Sea Shepherd helps to clean the oceans. We have a global campaign, which is marine debris cleanup. It occurs both on the shore and in the oceans. We have divers that go out and kind of collect whatever they can that is not supposed to be in the ocean from the ocean. We also have a Clean Waves campaign, and I have never heard of this tiny little island, but it's the island of Kiribati, and it's in the Central Pacific Ocean, and we just decided to focus a little bit there with one of our vessels. Basically, we all know we have very large plastic problems. Over 800 species of animals are affected, especially the birds, which was mentioned earlier, and also the turtles. Straws kind of get caught in their nasal passages, not a good thing. Also, they mistake the plastic bags for food and end up eating them because it looks like they're food. The most we found are fishing gear, plastic, cigarette butts. Basically, that's kind of what gets caught in the ocean. These are examples. This bottom lower picture is a lovely mylar balloon that one of our vessels found just kind of floating out there. I don't know how many miles out they were, but it was pretty far out. And the other two pictures are basically all the fishing gear and ropes that we find. It's estimated that by 2025, we'll have 1 pound of plastic per 3 pounds of fish, which is not sustainable. So basically at Sea Shepherd we say skip the straw and skip the seafood. And those who live by rivers, creeks, all that stuff kind of goes down into the ocean anyway, so it poses a big problem. Now we're going to go on to the local business impact, and what we did was I took the restaurants in Atlantic Beach, and then Parker did the ones on St. Augustine Beach. So I'm going to turn this over to him and we'll switch places.
Alright, so I was in charge of St. Augustine Beach restaurants. So I went around asking just about their local plastics, like if they had a recycle bin, what they did with their recyclables. Sunset Grill, everybody kind of knows where Sunset Grill is if you're around here. Come on, they have great food. I mean, come on. But they do have a plastic bin, but it only comes like 2-3 times a week. They recycle cardboards and plastics. The Oasis, everybody knows what the Oasis is. No recycle bin. Everything's just thrown in the dumpster. Blown away, wind can blow it wherever. We have Obi's filling station. They also don't have a recycling bin, which is really surprising, actually. But they have really good burgers. Salt Life Food Shack, they do have a recycle bin. Now when I did talk to one of the managers about it, he was actually really sincere about, like, they do try a lot. The company actually pays to have their plastics and recyclables taken from there. The Beachcomber, right on the beach, everything like that. I actually talked to the guy that actually started the Beachcomber, and he just kind of told me straight up what happened. They recycle 95% of what they produce. 80% of their stuff is recycled or biodegradable. One actually really cool fact that I actually found out is that their to-go silverware is actually made of cornstarch. So it is biodegradable, because plastics, forks, knives, spoons, you get everywhere. Amici's Italian restaurant, I've never been there, but they don't have a recycling bin. The Tides, no recycling bin. Stirred Up, they have 1 or 2 in the back, but they really weren't sure, which is kind of surprising. I mean, you usually know what's behind your restaurant, but I don't work there. Jack's Barbecue, no recycling bin, but they have a dumpster. Mangoes, yeah, no recycling bin either. And we'll switch it over. Here you go.
Okay, so I'm going to go through Atlantic Beach kind of quickly. Ragtime was really proud that they pay extra to recycle, but they still use the plastic and the styrofoam to carry out. Starbucks converted their cups. They used to have more plastic on their cups, but in 2017 they changed to a number 5 plastic. And we all know that lovely numbering system where some can't go in the recycle. So they're making strides, let's just put it that way. Witt's Frozen Custard and Dreamette, pretty much the same. They have about 200 items of plastic per day and no recycling program. Southern Grounds was 300 in a day, no recycling program. And Al's Pizza, no recycling program, so we're seeing a little bit of a theme here. The Loop, there's a little quote, people will not pay more unless it is directly benefiting to them, and since environmentally friendly options are not popular, I disagree with that. Businesses cannot bring themselves to pay the extra cost. Yes, it does cost businesses extra, but if we go to businesses that actually care about what they're throwing in the ocean, maybe they'll get the message. And then Homespun Kitchen, also 300 plastic items a day. And these are all estimates from the managers. Flying Iguana, 200. Lemon Bar, 300. With Lemon Bar, there was an interesting contest that they had with one of the local surf shops one time, where the person who could recycle the most glass would get a free diving outfit or surf outfit or something. And they ended up winning because they got all the stuff from the Lemon Bar. So here was one person that wanted to win a contest, and he got all the stuff from himself. And the manager did make a good point that if there were a tax deduction or incentive, then more companies would be more likely to switch. This is just kind of a what you can do type of slide. Obviously, we know to use the recycling bags, not the silly K-Pod cups. Use real silverware or bring bamboo. And I know it's hard to remember sometimes to bring your extra straw and your extra utensils, but it does make a difference. And then just a few more items are toothbrushes that they make in bamboo, which are a little bit better than just the plastic. And so as to end on a positive note of what we can do, start small by making 1 or 2 changes. Continue to educate friends because, one person tells another person, etc. Alternatives in the marketplace, only we can push that because if we don't go to places that use the plastic stuff, then again, they'll get the message. Recycle yourself, obviously. Banning microbeads, which we all know is a major problem, and help with beach cleanup events and also track what you find. Sea Shepherd Jacksonville has a monthly beach cleanup event. It's on our Facebook page. And usually in the summer, we'll make it a little bit earlier so that we don't get caught in the heat. And we kind of send all of the cigarette butts once we get enough to TerraCycle, and they recycle the cigarette butts. So we use gloves. We don't go around there picking up the cigarette butts with our hands or anything. So that is basically it. Any questions?
I have a question. Is it possible, do you have a list of the restaurants that you surveyed about how they handle recycling so that we can go to the ones that we think are better for the environment? Do you have a list?
I can email John maybe, and maybe you can disseminate that to the...
That would really help.
We can do it,
A lot of people like me will not go to the Oasis ever again.
Another question.
I don't know if this is for you or Parker, but what's interesting, I live on Anastasia Island, and what I don't understand is why, as homeowners or home renting, whatever, there's a collection process readily available for them. But for businesses, why isn't there some mandate that they must all have a recycling bin and just charge us extra? I mean, whether it's a restaurant or I look at the gas stations, and there are some, like Publix, it's got some recycling bins available for some effort, and so does Lowe's and Target, but Home Depot does not, and others. But on the island, to me, all those restaurants you listed, why isn't there a mandate they must?
So some of the businesses that I actually spoke to kind of didn't mention it directly, but kind of indirectly mentioned it, that is actually they need to pay to have their recyclables come and picked up. And Jack's Barbecue used to have one. I talked to one of their associates, and he didn't really know what happened because they did used to have one, but then all of a sudden it wasn't there anymore.
Why can't the county simply make a requirement that they must, and then they would all be on the same same level playing field, and just charge extra to offset the cost?
So just like Janet and Ashley said, vote with your dollars. Start spending money more at the beachcomber. Do kind of stuff like that. But I mean,
I guess it's a legal question. I don't understand why can't you mandate it for all?
I can answer that for you. I'm sorry.
I would think that what you were addressing would be something that the county commission could take up. And that might be an interesting thing for somebody who really wants to speak up about it at a commission meeting.
In the white.
I don't have a question, because you have something that benefit. You go out to you're ordering a drink, you tell them you don't want a straw. If you do get a straw, take it home and recycle it. Same thing, if you're drinking from this, take it home to recycle. This is recycled in here. If you're eating out, you know that you're going to take something home, bring your own recyclable, container. And if you don't want, if these places aren't recycling, they're not going to, you don't have to eat there. So if you get them, you tell me that, say you recycle. They say no, thank you. When you start recycling, I'll come into your establishment. And then you'll get free money. There's a lot of restaurants out there. Hurt them in the pocket. Okay.
You're good, don't worry. In the gray, right there. Didn't you have your hand raised? Oh, never mind. Okay, I guess not. All the way across.
Yeah. One positive, beachcombers owned by Donald Sonora, who's a St. Augustine Beach City Commissioner, and I'm going to call it grassland. Everybody else should encourage his fellow politicians to do the other person.
Exactly. And then.
What are microbeads? They've been banned, by the way.
They have been banned. It's going to take, they're the little tiny things that they put in like face cleansers, and they're just little teeny tiny plastic beads. And what happens is when you wash them down the drain, they eventually end up in the ocean, which then end up in seafood, and there you go.
Also, Lisa, just those pods that are sold Tide or whatever that have the soap inside those plastic pods, isn't that a problem with the micro?
That I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I got another question. Why no one has addressed why apartments don't have recycling? Has anybody, gone into that?
Actually, no. I would imagine that if you live in an apartment that doesn't recycle, go to the office and ask them to.
I know.
Yeah, but one person can start. Yes, sir.
Do you all lobby your county commissioners? Could you get a couple of commissioners to give you an audience and maybe get a bill proposed? That would be the way to get the law in place.
Sea Shepherd as a whole does not. We're more concerned with the ocean. However, individual members can. Like, for instance, I could go and say something as myself, not as a Sea Shepherd representative.
Or maybe you could tie up with the Sierra Club and form a little
alliance.
Yeah, get it done. Get a caucus going.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I heard this, and Adam Worley confirmed it, that China doesn't want our plastic anymore. And does anybody have an update on what's going to happen to it? Supposedly, as it is now, all the plastics being warehoused, and that'll only go for, we're not going to waste the warehouse space indefinitely, and it'll end up going all go in the dump. All these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I imagine China probably has their own plastic to deal with, and that's probably why they don't want plastic. I don't know for sure what's going on.
I saw a documentary, I think in the last film festival here in St. Augustine, where these gentlemen leaving these boats in these beautiful oceans of the Bahamas and the Caribbean. They have these nets at different densities. And oh my God, after they reached all the plastic that was in these, from tiny, tiny little beads to big pieces of plastic that were just, I mean, it's all around you and you just don't know. Are you guys somehow?
We actually are doing some recycling, like the things we find, we're turning into bracelets. We're working with Stella McCartney. She makes backpacks out of the recycled plastics. To your point, there's also something called the 5 gyres, and they are basically somewhere out in the ocean. There are 5 different places where it's just swirling around and around. And there are really like inventive college-age individuals that are developing things to draw that plastic out of the ocean and recycle, make something out of it.
Isn't really the key to forcing the manufacturers to develop alternatives? Because if you continue, I mean, there's only so much you can recycle. And even if you make bracelets, eventually they're going to end up back in the dumps. Right. So the real key is the source of the problem, which is the manufacturers.
Yes, very good point.
We are because we're the consumer.
Exactly. Very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, there's been a thing for around a year or 2 years or so. There's a brewery in southern Florida that produces, instead of using the 6-pack plastic things that hold them together, they put, and I don't know what the stuff is made out of, but these plastic things that hold 6-packs of their beer together actually are food, and the fish eat them, and the turtles eat them, and I want to be able to buy that beer, because I like beer. That's the beer I want to buy if I'm going to be shopping with my dog.
Those do exist. I don't know what kind of beer it is either.
How could we find out about that? Because I'll buy that beer too.
You could probably,
Google it.
I'd say Google the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next topic, this is the last couple have been talking about local things. This goes beyond the shore a little bit, and that is offshore drilling, which is a very important issue in our community. And that's Jen Momberg, the Matanzas River Keeper, and Kendall Duty from the Nice Environmental Club.
I just got yeses and nos. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much, John, for your introduction, and thank all of you for sticking around tonight and hanging out with us. Kendall and I are going to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on in the world of offshore drilling. As John mentioned, I am the Matanzas River Keeper. We are a nonprofit NGO, and our mission is to protect the health of the Matanzas River and its watershed through advocacy and education and community engagement. So as I'm sure all of you guys know, the Matanzas River is a tidal estuary. It supports over 2,000 species of plants and animals, according to a study done by the University of Florida Whitney Lab, and it is directly attached to the ocean at the St. Augustine Inlet and the Matanzas Inlet. So if something like an oil spill were to happen anywhere in the proximity of our coasts, it would have absolutely devastating effects on the ecology of the Matanzas River. So to that end, our organization works in a supporting role to other organizations whose priority is on initiatives that protect our coastlines from offshore drilling. So to give you a little bit of a background of what has been going on, recently BOEM released their DPP, and as I'm sure you've realized, environmental legislation is just like this alphabet soup of acronyms. So BOEM is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They are responsible for overseeing all of the offshore energy production within our federal waters. And the DPP is the draft proposed program that will govern the next cycle of sales of leases for exploration for oils and gases off the coast, as well as drilling. So this DPP is kind of unprecedented in that it would open up 90% of the outer continental shelf to drilling, which is a proportion that we haven't seen before in our country's history. And that's pretty terrifying for a couple of reasons. First of all, this underscores our nation's reliance on fossil fuels and just kind of emphasizes the reluctance of our leaders to transition to diversifying their energy portfolio and transitioning to a reliance on renewable energies. It's also pretty terrifying because we have seen what kind of effects oil spills can have on coastal communities based on what happened in 2010 with the Deepwater Horizon tragedy. So that's all still very fresh in our minds at this point. So the fact that this could be coming to beaches near us is a pretty terrifying prospect. And there has been a lot of back and forth in the news recently about whether or not Florida is on the table for drilling off of our coasts. And I would like to make it very clear to all of us that we are still very much on the table for drilling, despite what our governor or what Secretary Zinke says to the contrary. A federal agency cannot arbitrarily decide that a state is not going to participate in a federal program because of its unique environmental makeup. That's just not how our administrative process works. So to everybody who's been lulled into a false sense of security that Florida is not being considered for offshore oil drilling, that's not the case at all. So with that very fresh in your mind, I am going to let Kendall go into the details about some of the risks and threats associated with offshore drilling.
Yes. I'd like to say first of all that I think living here in St. Augustine and growing up with the beaches gives us just such a unique view and such a personal connection to these possible dangers, like Jen said. The tourism industry in Florida in 2016, the total impact of indirect and direct effects was $88 billion of the GDP, over 1 million jobs, and $53 billion in wages. The tourism accounts for 9.5% of the GDP and 17% of total employment. The risks that we get from having these rigs out on our coasts, as we've seen with, as she said, the BP oil spill, they go beyond even just the, I mean, obviously the catastrophic effects that they have on animals and the environment. They affect the tourism. They have this, they give a certain public perception that people have about what things will be like if they come here. When the BP oil spill happened, people thought beaches up and down the coast were affected when so many, I mean, people in Miami never even saw effects from the oil spill, but still experienced these negative effects of people not coming and canceling their stays because of just the media attention on it. And while large and public oil spills are not, you know, this everyday occurrence, there still are subtle oil spills which leak about 13 million gallons of oil into the oceans yearly. And additionally, since 2006, there have been 21 offshore rig blowouts, 513 fires and explosions, and 30 fatalities from offshore drilling only in the Gulf Coast. The tourism industry in Florida is so valuable and so important to our economy. It's just, we can't afford for it to take a hit from these preventable dangers. It's not safe. Offshore drilling is not safe. The safeguards that they have put in place since the BP oil spill have not been enough. Before there even begins to be drilling, the technique that they use to look for oil, which is called seismic air gun blasting, and it is not great. The ships are towing air guns and they blast low frequency but very high intensity sound waves to the ocean floor, and they disturb the daily routines of marine life. They kill zooplankton, they damage dolphins' hearing, and they can disrupt behavior of animals that are up to 100 miles away. During the drilling process, a harmful effect is caused by flaring, which is a common method of disposing of the liquid and gas hydrocarbons that are used. The pollutants given off include carbon dioxide, black carbon, hydrocarbons, and particulate matter. They contribute to global warming, they damage the plant and animal life, and they degrade the nearby ecosystems. Additionally, from the flaring, at night, the light given off will attract birds and they'll just collide with the rigs, and it causes a lot of fatalities. These negative environmental and economic impacts, they outweigh all of the benefits basically that we've been told will come from offshore drilling. It's been said that we can become energy independent or lower the price of gas, but the reality is that even if we open up all of our coasts in America to offshore drilling, by 2060, we'll only lower the price of gas by 3 cents a gallon, and we will still have to import and rely on imports of oil for 58% of all of what we use. So the negative impacts of offshore drilling can be so widespread and cause such catastrophic effects at the risk of animal life, of environmental and human health, of this excessive tourism here in Florida, which is so important, and the benefits are so negligible that our money and our time and our resources could be so much better used. If we really want to be energy independent, we need to look to a future where we're using clean and renewable energy resources and not depending on oil at all. Instead of opening up our shores to like this dangerous industry that can affect all aspects of our life, we really need to be focusing on more important things.
Of law, it's required to open up a public comment period and accept public comments and then review those public comments. So signing petitions is absolutely fantastic. That is a great way to voice your opinion and make sure that you're heard, but submitting public comments are required to be reviewed by the agency you are submitting them to. It is all recorded and it's all public record. So that is really somewhere that you can make an enormous impact. The first public comment period for the DPP closed back in March. And by the time that it closed, 200 East Coast municipalities had publicly submitted comments in opposition to offshore drilling. Those are entire municipalities, cities and towns, communities that rely on clean and healthy beaches came out in opposition of this. To that end, over 1,200 local, state, and federal elected officials had done it as well. And then by the time the public comment period closed in March, 1.35 million comments had been submitted against offshore drilling. That translates to 1.35 million voters, and that has an impact with our elected officials. So paying attention to when these public comment periods open up is hugely important to making sure that your opinion and your voice is being taken into account and is being heard. So what's going to happen next is that BOEM will create their proposed plan, and they're conducting an environmental impact statement, and then another public comment period is going to open up. So there's going to be another window and another opportunity for all of you to submit comments about how you feel about this draft proposed plan to open up our coastlines to offshore drilling and seismic blasting. And then after that, they will release their final program, and there will be another public comment period. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to make sure that your voice is heard on this issue. And then scaling down a little bit to a more local level, there is currently a constitutional amendment that's being considered that would ban seismic testing and oil and gas drilling within state waters. So to help you conceptualize that a little bit, the Outer Continental Shelf extends to about 200 miles off of our coasts. That's all federally managed ocean area. State waters extend to about 3 miles off the Atlantic coast and about 9 miles into the Gulf of Mexico. So relatively speaking, it's a very small area of ocean, but at the same time, it is a very critical area of ocean because that is the ocean that immediately buffers our coastline. So if we do end up having oil and gas exploration, we could at least have a buffer to know that our coasts would have some sort of safety measure in place from oil and gas drilling. So the way that that process works is the Constitutional Revision Commission meets every 20 years, and they discuss proposed amendments to our state's constitution, and they're currently in that process right now. I think there's something like 24 proposals that are currently being discussed, and one of them is Proposal 91 is the name of it, P91. So they are currently getting ready in the next couple of weeks here to decide which of these proposals are going to be on the ballot this November for us to vote on. And any of the proposals that make it to the ballot in November, if they get 60% of the vote, then they're added to our state's constitution. So at this point in the process, this commission is still determining which of these proposals are going to come before all of us for voting. So something else that you can do right now is you can submit comments on how you feel about this constitutional amendment to our state's constitution. All of you with your notebooks, or ready to write it down, if you go to banbabyban.com, then you can submit all of your public comments online to the Center of Biological Diversity's website. So I encourage all of you to do that right now and keep an eye out for when the next round of public comments comes out for the federal DPP. We can take questions, sure.
How do you find out about these public comment windows of opportunity?
Unfortunately, a lot of the way that these things are generally publicly noticed is in some really convoluted, hard-to-find database. My recommendation to you would be to join one of your local NGOs who keeps track of these things. One of my favorite things to do on Facebook is post, hey, the public comment period is open for this. Email this person, call this number, go to this website and submit comments, because otherwise, you're right, it completely goes under the radar. People don't even realize that it's happening. So I would recommend whatever area you are most interested in, whether it's coastal, whether it's environmental generally, find an NGO that will notify you when these things are coming around. Yes, sir.
If the CRC fails to put it on the ballot, there is another alternative, and of course, it would make the ballot in 2020,
sure.
But you can start a petition program through a political sponsoring committee. You have to be registered with the state. Start a petition program to amend the Constitution.
Yeah, that's correct. There are several ways to amend our state's constitution. This is just the one that is currently in the process right now, and they had to go through a preliminary vote earlier this month on all of these different proposals to see whether they would even make it this far, and there was only one vote against this provision, which is absolutely fantastic. This is a bipartisan issue. So the fact that there was only one naysayer, it gives me high hopes that this is going to make it onto the ballot in November.
And will it be clear on the ballot as to what you're voting for? So
You know?
asking for the proposition in California that went against the gay people, the wording, is it going to be clear?
So I wish I could say yes, but as you know, the legislative process is seldom that cut and dry. So the way that it actually shakes out is, for some reason, the Constitutional Revision Commission likes to bundle amendments together. If you ask them why, they say it's because they're afraid if they put 24 amendments on there, people are going to get voter fatigue, and they're not going to want to read the entire ballot and vote for everything. So they bundle things together, and the things that they bundle don't always make sense to be bundled. So right now, the proposal is to bundle P91 with a ban on vaping in the workplace. E-cigarettes, using e-cigarettes in the workplace. We've been trying to figure that one out, but we have not been able to yet. So you might have to vote on banning vaping in the workplace in order to ban offshore drilling. I'm sorry, I'm not a legislator. I'm not sure how that happened. So yeah, completely just like this, right? Yeah. So yeah, I wish I could explain that one better, but so far nobody has been able to figure that one out. Yes, ma'am.
Jen mentioned that she is the river keeper for the Matanzas, and I just want to remind everyone that the just a couple few blocks that way, you can walk it, bike it, drive it, is the confluence of the Matanzas and the San Sebastian. It is also the site of the new Dr. Haley Memorial Park. Some of you were there last week for the dedication, and also for the concert, the Amphini Chimes concert the week before, which, by the way, somebody just gave me money tonight for that. And that's going to, I'm hoping it's going to net about $1,500. I think we're up to $1,300 now. But anyway, that's an ongoing project. The installation is there, the chimes are there, the sculpture is there, done by internationally known Joe Siegel. The tiles that the students from Dixon School Boys and Girls Clubs and Augustine Youth Academy incarcerated boys are on the bench. I don't know if they're going to be colored or something. Right now they're sketched in. It sounds like that's not finished. Of course, the plants, native plants and trees, that's going to be ongoing. Anyway, if you want to go there, take your children, take your grandchildren. You also want to connect it to the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center. And the ongoing project, the next thing they're working on is the Legacy Project. That is where the fourth, you know how all the fourth graders in Florida come to St. Augustine to to learn the history, Spanish history, go to the fort, St. George Street, etc. They are going to have the option of going to the Lincolnville Museum, learning about the civil rights history in the 450 years. Oh, okay. I just want to make sure you go down, just go down here. You speak right here, your point.
Thank you, and thank you, Jen and Kendall, for your excellent presentation. One more question.
I had a short question about all of the city and county commissions that had submitted against the proposal for drilling. I was aware that over 200 up and down the coast of Florida have done that for seismic testing. But I was at an event just about a month ago. At that point, it was my understanding that only a handful of city and county commissioners had registered their complaints against opening up for offshore drilling. Do you know the current status of that? Because I think a lot of people have been confused, as you mentioned, about what Zinke and Scott supposedly agreed to.
Yeah, my understanding, I got my numbers from Oceana, and they keep a running tally, and they advocate for local municipalities to pass these types of resolutions. So that's where I got that number from, and it's my understanding that that is for the most recent version of the draft proposed plan.
Well, that's interesting, because I think I was at the event, they were the people who said that 200 had commented against it for seismic testing, but only a handful for the recently approved offshore drilling.
Okay, just to be clear, seismic testing is the precursor to offshore drilling. That's the process that they use to find the oil. So if, like, originally when Scott and Zinke said that drilling for oil was off the table off of Florida's coast, when they were questioned about it, they specifically said, oh, but seismic testing is still allowed. Which, if you think about it, why would they still allow seismic testing if they weren't going to allow drilling for oil? So it was completely a charade. That was made pretty apparent by these comments. So we're going to turn it back over to John now to get things rolling.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to widen the lens a little bit more for the final topic, and that is climate change in the modern world. Bill Hamilton and Maya Albo.
Thank you. So here's the deal. It's not by, there's no misunderstanding about why there's only a few of us here tonight. It's because the issues that we're talking about are difficult. And I commend and salute all of you that showed up tonight on a Friday night when you could be doing a million other things to talk about difficult issues and things that are, there's a lot of bad news out there. And as much as we of the panel would like to sugarcoat it, it's difficult right now. The world is in a difficult position. We're in a difficult political position, we're in a difficult biological position, we're in a difficult climate position. And there's good news and there's bad news. And the good news is that what people think and what they say and what they do makes a difference. What you think determines how you act. And within the grand scheme of things, not a sparrow falls that goes unremarked by the sentient universe. Or in another way, we're all connected. And that what happens to the least of us affects the most powerful. And so it only takes a handful of people to make a difference. And it's people like we in this room tonight that are sitting here listening to all of this difficult, bad news, that we're the people who have made change over the centuries. We live in a time of competing visions, and there is the vision that is holding sway in the world today, not just in the United States, but across the world, that believes that more seismic testing and more offshore drilling and more clear cutting and more plastics and more developments and roads, and all of this is the answer to making the world a better place. And a lot of those people believe that because they profit themselves by doing it. But a lot of people believe it because that's the way things are. And that's what's got us to where we are today, and it's really not that bad because they don't look very far. And climate change is an example, just one example of something that's big. It's really big, and it's hard for us to sit in this room for a couple of hours and put our hands around how big all of this is. And the one vision that holds that it's okay to do all of that, you take all you want, and the impacts to the Matanzas River or to birds or to sea turtles or whales, it doesn't really matter. I mean, for them, there is that vision. And then there's the competing vision that has kept the world alive historically for thousands of years. And that vision holds that the measure of what you do, the measure of whether or not it's okay for what you do personally or as a community or as a nation or as a community of humans, the measure of whether or not that's okay is how it affects the whole cycle of life. Is it okay to drill and seismic test? Well, I mean, the guys that own Shell Oil, they think that's a pretty good idea. But if you ask the right whales or the 45,000 incidental take mammals, 45,000, and I was one of the first people to go, we discovered by accident that BOEM was holding these public comment periods. The first one was in 2012, and 6 of us went to Jacksonville and gave public comment. We just discovered, and it was way down the process. These guys have been working on this thing for a long time. And when the public comment period showed up in 2012 in Jacksonville, St. Johns County didn't know about it. St. Augustine Beach didn't know about it. St. Augustine City didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it. And we drove up there and gave public comment to these guys that had a whole room full of oil people, and they're wearing red shirts saying, yeah, we love this. But a handful of people went up there, and we got back to St. Augustine. We said, what the F? Does the county commission know that they're going to put an oil rig out? I mean, they're talking about killing 45,000 dolphins. Can you imagine what would happen if 1,000 dead dolphins washed up on the beach in Ponte Vedra? What that would do? What that says about us as a people? And before long, I mean, we got people really exercised. And St. Johns County was one of the first municipalities to sign a resolution in opposition to this. And now there's an organization, another NGO, BAPAC. They've got 45,000 businesses in opposition to this. It was 6 people that went up there and started talking. So I'm telling you, what you do, if you stand up for what's right, it makes a difference. Climate change is, when I was 40 years old, my father encouraged me to join a Rotary Club, my brother and me. And actually, we've been in Rotary for 2 years. And my mother said, yeah, your dad's really excited about you all joining Rotary. And we said, yeah, we're really excited too, because it'll give him something to do. It's going to get him out of the family business. But the president of Rotary International in 1990, Paulo Costa, one of the most wealthy individuals from Brazil, he was an architect. He became president of Rotary International. His whole thing was, he had seen what was happening to the forests in Brazil, and he wanted to get the business and community leaders around the world to preserve planet Earth. And so he started this initiative to get business leaders involved in environmental issues. And so, wow, we thought that's a pretty good deal. I've been involved in environmental issues since I was a kid, because I saw what happened to where I grew up, which is Crescent Beach, because of development. So I convinced the Rotarian magazine to give me a press pass to go to the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio. And it was the first time world leaders from all over the world came together to talk about environmental issues because they recognized in their own countries that things were starting to fall apart, and they recognized the implications for that. And they understood that we can't live outside of a healthy biological system. And this was in 1992. And so Al Gore was the year that he published Earth in the Balance, and he was one of the presenters. He was still a senator there. It was before Clinton had chosen him to be his running mate as VP. And he talked about climate change. And it was the first time, all these different environmental issues, I mean, biodiversity and oceans and forests and indigenous people were there. All these different environmental issues coming together, and Al Gore was the one that talked about climate change. And it's astounding what he said. We knew back then that greenhouse gases due to burning carbon are going to create the situation that we find ourselves in today. And I can give you some really bad news if you want to hear it. Some really startling statistics, some really scary shit about what's going on in the ice caps and what our prospects are. It's not good, and I'm going to be straight up front with you. It's not good. And these people right here, these younger people, it's going to be them that are stuck with what has happened and what we have known as a culture since 1990 unequivocally. There is no scientific debate anymore about what we're doing. And the rate of those changes, the rate of warming and the rate of melting and the rate of of sea level rise, all of those rates are accelerating. So these issues are going to come to bear on us. The president of Rotary International this year, and I've got the magazine, he is holding Paulo Costa up as a hero. And the president-elect for next year, which starts July 1, his name is Barry Rassin, and he's from the Bahamas. And to the Rotarian community, business and community leaders all over the world, he says the Bahamas by 2050 are going to be gone. All the Caribbean islands are going to be pretty much underwater. Coastal cities are going to be underwater. And so if you want to go to the Caribbean, you want to see the British West Indies, you better go now, because by the time you're my age, they're not going to be there anymore. And this is well documented. Anybody with a laptop can prove this to themselves. And so we in this room have a responsibility to be those people, to take this message to the county commission or to Gillum or to Gwen Graham or to whomever. It's up to us to stand up. There is one metric that we have yet to play. Sea level rise is baked into the system. We're not going to get it back. It's not going to go, the rate is not going to decrease. And the houses in Lincolnville and the houses in Davis Shores, those houses are going underwater. And that's the long and the short of it. And it's just a matter of time. It's baked into the system. The one card that we have left to play is when. That's the one thing that we don't know yet. How quickly is this going to happen? And the only metric that matters in all of that discussion is how many more greenhouse gases are we going to put in the atmosphere. Keystone Pipeline and fracking and drilling in Oklahoma, digging for coal in Colombia, all of those things. That's it. If we stopped today, if we stopped burning coal and carbon fuels today and went to total electric, St. Augustine's underwater. Period. But the difference between their future, if we quit today and if we continue business as usual, is that they have a difficult future, but it's manageable, as opposed to one that is not manageable. That's the reality of where we are. And it's big, it's huge, it's almost incomprehensible what we're facing right now. But it is the reality of the world that we live in, and it's the burden of that responsibility that we in this room bear because we showed up here on Friday night and agreed to listen to all of this stuff and say, we're going to make a difference. We're going to be those few people that steer the ship in a Maya and Kendall and I had breakfast at the Blue Hen, and we talked about what is it that we want to say to you all. I mean, is it I don't want to give you a term paper on climate change and give you all this kind of stuff. We want to talk to you about what this is, and so this is Maya's future and Kendall's and all. And I forgot your name. Sorry. Wow.
Parker?
Parker. I remembered it. I was going to remember it. Parker's future. It's your future. And so you all have a stake in what you want to say and what you want to see happen. And there's a lot of gray hair here, and we're working for you. So you need to tell us this is. So I want to hear from you what you. No pressure, Parker.
When I first got told that I would be doing the topic of climate change at this discussion, as a student, I took it as more of, as I said, a research paper where I'd be looking up facts and statistics and going on and on about how climate change is increasing, which you obviously all know from being here. And Kendall can even tell you how much I was freaking about like talking about how it affects me personally, and because it's such a big global issue, but there's no other way to take it than personally. And as far as I said, with islands in the Caribbean, my mom coming from Jamaica and Kendall's mom coming from Puerto Rico, which are islands out there in the Caribbean, it's something personal to us too, with these islands disappearing as far as climate change affecting coastal lines and affecting the cities out on the coast. And it's a difficult thing to face as a young person, thinking that you may not have the voice to stand up against this. And as we've seen with how political times have been, especially with our president, seeing how he addresses climate change, as we saw with the Paris Climate Agreement. And it's hard to think that our voices aren't necessarily heard. But what Bill helped me to see is that we do have a voice, and we are the future that will have to deal with climate change, because obviously the effects are already here, but what we can do is help to limit how much climate change increases over time. And me and Kendall, who are going to be taking over the Conservation Club at East next year, we were trying to think of projects that could help contribute to stuff like climate change, like animal habitats, which he talked about with the birds and their natural habitats. And we see it as our responsibility as the younger generation to not see climate change as something that's unfixable, unmanageable, that we can do nothing about, because there is something we can do. It might not completely erase the effects of climate change, but we can do something so that climate change is lessened and we can help our Earth be healthier and thrive more. So I think just as the younger generation in such a politically tumultuous time, seeing that we can actually make a change with the government and with our planet, and that it goes so much farther than just where we live, since we live in such a coastal area, that it expands all around the world. It expands to animals, it expands to health, since with climate change it would cause more flooding, which could increase waterborne diseases. It expands to so many things in our planet that no matter what your interest is, climate change could have an effect on that. And I think just as the younger generation, seeing that there were people in the past and there will be people in the future who do care about things such as climate change and offshore drilling, even if we don't necessarily have huge numbers in our club, just seeing that there's people out there now and people that we can get to care about this is really inspiring. So it was just great to come here and see so many people so invested, asking questions, actually caring, that it really just sets a positive outlook for the future. And we hope that we can have some sort of effect, whether it's going into politics, which I would personally love to do, or going into environmental science, which I would love to do. Just anything that makes some sort of change would be completely worth it. And I'm just so happy that I got to be a part of this. And hear everything everyone had to say.
May I say something? 15 years ago, in the state of Connecticut, my grandchildren came into my kitchen, they were in elementary school, and said to me, Nana, you have to recycle. You have to do this. And I said, where did you learn that? In school. Well, of course, we did it in Connecticut. But Connecticut changed that state in my lifetime from a river that was ridiculous to something that is now so much better, and you can actually swim in it. It is my belief, my grandchildren are now in college. It is my belief that the leaders have got to get younger and younger and younger and younger and younger. And I know 4 college women right now that have left, one of them has left environmental engineering to go into politics. So I am hoping that this will happen. But the state of Florida has got to get together in the schools. And in our families, we have to tell our grandchildren, our children, as they come home, as they can, you do not litter. You do not do this. You do not do that. And from that sparks the change. Florida is quite behind the time.
Okay, any other concluding comments?
You also have to, trust me, my mouth carries. You have to contact the senators, representatives, you have to write to them, you have to call them, go to Tallahassee. I mean, get involved. Speak to, oh, well, our neighbor during talk. Because there's only one who's over the tongue. He's nicer. Well, you've heard it, you know. Just get involved. Get your children involved. We've gotten our neighbors who have gone after they move. But their kids are now involved. And it is the younger generation. But we are there to work with you. Trust me. Open your mouth and don't let anybody shut you up or shut you down. If you want, you give them my name, I'll take care of it.
Go ahead.
Sounds like I want to say something. So really great panel. Thank you. Just one thing I was thinking about when you were all talking. I've been in science all my life. Ecology, environmental science, animal behavior, ecological systems, all sorts of things. And what's always kind of amazed me that ties into what you're all saying about making differences, big differences and little differences, is that whenever you stop, whenever you reduce something that's damaging to an environment, that in ecosystems and the earth has a great ability to heal itself if it's left alone. So that almost anything you can do, if you can reduce seismic testing to look for oil, that's going to have an impact. If you can stop, you were talking about trees in Brazil, hardwood forest in Brazil, old growth forest. If you can stop logging there, those forests tend to, as long as there's something left, regrow. So it's a big problem, but it's certainly a problem that if you use all these efforts to stop some of these things, you can recover some of the integrity of the ecosystems that we have.
I guess this one's to Bill. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't believe in climate change. Do you think the fires in California, the mudslides in California, the hurricanes in Houston, Puerto Rico, Eastern Islands, the cyclone storms in the summer, do you think more and more people now are starting to take a pause and say, this might be for real?
Sure, I do. And I think that I've given this climate talk a bunch of times, and there's generally somebody in the audience that wants to argue about it, and they bring up all this stuff that they've seen somewhere. And it's as if you're sitting on an airplane and the guy next to you says, hey, I don't think that pilot's doing the right job. I think that we need to go up there and argue with the pilot. Well, no, you're not going to argue with the pilot. You're going to let him fly the plane. And so if climate scientists are the people who have studied this extensively and are saying we're making a mistake, if you want, don't argue with me. Go up there and argue with him. You don't argue balls and strikes with the umpire. You don't argue with your doctor about whether or not smoking's a good deal. I mean, smart. I mean, if the reason people doubt is because that doubt was created to protect the oil industry, pure and simple. And it worked. I mean, we don't understand how, a lot of times we don't understand why we believe something, and it's because of the images that are planted in our minds that determine what we think about something. I mean, we don't pay attention to data very well. We're not really good at that. That guy that's a scientist, he pays attention to that. But generally, we as a community pay attention to these images, and then we're real opinionated about it. So that's beginning to change because, just like you say, weather in the extreme has become the norm, and there is no debate within the scientific community, and there's no debate within the business and community, the business and leadership community around the world. The Rotarian magazine now is saying we as business leaders have to stand up and address this issue because it's going to decide every other issue. It's going to be the thing that determines the legislative agenda or the economic agenda. Coastal retreat is the thing that we need to be talking about now. While we have a chance, while we can in an orderly fashion, figure out how to move away from the areas that are going to flood, because you can argue about that until the tide comes in.
John, if I could just add to that as well. We can't always be in the business of trying to convince people that don't believe in climate change that it is in fact happening. In fact, I don't know if that's such a great use of time, because eventually all you have to do is look in the storm drain of Davis Shores and see a colony of sea urchins to know, Houston, you have a problem. I mean, it's happening. That's the practical reality of it. And quite frankly, it's also going to be very market-driven. The entities that are paying attention to sea level rise are the insurance companies that are no longer going to be providing mortgage insurance for high-rise condos going down in Miami. So that is the practical reality, that the market-driven forces are going to change the shape of the conversation, whether you believe it in or not. And I just wanted to add, just to give a little bit more hope to this panel, there's a group of children, some of who are as young as 10 years old, that this upcoming Monday are going to be suing the state of Florida for breach of the public trust doctrine. It's a massive lawsuit. I'm very honored to be one of the plaintiffs. And it's all because the state of Florida has essentially breached the public's trust when it comes to the issue of climate change and sea level rise. So, hoorah, keep going, guys.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to give a particular shout out to Tom Mangan, who's sitting here at 3 o'clock this afternoon to set this up.